In the world of startups, Paul Graham, the co-founder of Y Combinator, introduced a concept that is as intriguing as it is crucial: the notion of being default dead versus default alive. This binary framework categorizes startups into two distinct states based on their financial trajectory and the likelihood of survival without additional external funding. Understanding this concept can be the difference between a startup thriving or succumbing to failure. But what do these terms mean, and why are they so vital to the startup ecosystem? Understanding default dead. Default dead is a term that Graham uses to describe a startup that is on a path to running out of money before reaching profitability. In other words, if a startup's current financial situation continues without significant change, it will eventually die. This state is common among startups that are heavily reliant on external funding without a clear path to self-sustainability. A startup is considered default dead when its expenses consistently exceed its revenue, and it is not growing fast enough to close that gap. For such companies, even with investor backing, the runway is finite, and if they don't reach a profitable state before the money runs out, they will cease to exist. This situation is especially perilous for startups because they may find themselves constantly in fundraising mode, unable to focus on product development, customer acquisition, or other critical growth activities. The reality of being default dead. Being default dead is not necessarily a death sentence, but it is a warning sign. It indicates that the startup needs to either drastically reduce costs, significantly increase revenue, or both. The challenge lies in making these changes quickly enough to avoid exhausting the company's resources. The reality of being default dead is often a stressful one for founders. It means that there is a looming deadline by which the company needs to either become profitable or secure more funding. This pressure can lead to rushed decisions, such as accepting unfavorable investment terms, cutting corners on product development, or pursuing short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability. Moreover, being default dead can have a psychological impact on the team. The constant fear of running out of money can create a culture of desperation, where the focus shifts from innovation and growth to mere survival. This environment can stifle creativity and lead to burnout among employees, further diminishing the startup's chances of success. Understanding default alive. On the flip side is the concept of being default alive. A startup in this state is on a trajectory where, even without additional funding, it will eventually become profitable. This is the ideal state for any startup because it means that the company is self-sustaining and can continue to grow and operate without relying on constant infusions of capital. A default alive startup has a business model that works. Its revenues exceed its expenses, or at least it is on a clear path to reaching that point. This position allows the startup to focus on scaling and improving its product, rather than being preoccupied with the next round of funding. It also puts the startup in a stronger negotiating position when it does seek additional investment, as it is not desperate for cash to survive. The advantages of being default alive. Being default alive offers numerous advantages. For one, it provides a sense of security and stability. The startup's survival is not contingent on external factors such as investor sentiment or market conditions. This stability allows founders to plan for the long term, make strategic investments in growth, and experiment with new ideas without the constant pressure of financial doom. Furthermore, default alive startups tend to attract better talent. Potential employees are more likely to join a company that appears stable and has a clear path to success. This ability to attract top talent can further fuel the startup's growth and innovation. In addition, being default alive gives startups greater control over their destiny. They can choose to raise money on their terms, from investors who share their vision, rather than taking the first offer that comes along out of desperation. This control extends to decision-making within the company. as the founders are not beholden to investors who may push for quick exits or other strategies that do not align with the startup's long-term goals. Moving from default dead to default alive. The transition from default dead to default alive is challenging but not impossible. It requires a thorough evaluation of the startup's business model, expenses, and revenue streams. Founders need to ask tough questions. Is our product truly meeting a market need? Are we spending money on the right things? How can we increase our revenue without significantly increasing costs? One strategy for making this transition is to focus on achieving product-market fit. When a startup's product resonates with its target audience, revenue tends to follow. This might mean pivoting the product, rethinking the target market, or even overhauling the business model entirely. The key is to find a sustainable way to generate revenue that can cover the company's expenses. Another approach is to reduce burn rate, the rate at which the startup is spending its cash reserves. This could involve cutting non-essential expenses, negotiating better deals with suppliers, or even downsizing the team. While these measures may be painful in the short term, they can help extend the startup's runway and buy time to achieve profitability. The role of investors in the default dead versus default alive dynamic investors play a crucial role in whether a startup is default dead or default alive. Savvy investors will evaluate a startup's trajectory and determine whether it is on a path to profitability or whether it will require continuous infusions of capital to survive. They may push for changes that can shift the startup towards being default alive, such as altering the business model, cutting costs, or focusing on different market segments. However, not all investors have the startup's long-term interests at heart. Some may push for aggressive growth strategies that prioritize short-term revenue at the expense of long-term sustainability. This approach can exacerbate a default dead situation by increasing the company's burn rate without ensuring that the underlying business model is sound. Founders need to be cautious about the types of investors they bring on board and ensure that their goals align with those of the startup. It's important to communicate openly with investors about the company's financial situation and the steps being taken to move towards being default alive. Conclusion: navigating the startup landscape. The concepts of default dead and default alive are more than just financial metrics. They are reflections of a startup's overall health and viability. Understanding where a startup stands on this spectrum can help founders make informed decisions about their business strategy, fundraising efforts, and long-term goals. For startups, the goal should always be to move towards being default alive. This state not only ensures the company's survival, but also positions it for sustainable growth and success. By focusing on product-market fit, controlling expenses, and working with aligned investors, startups can navigate the treacherous waters of the early stages and emerge as thriving, profitable businesses.